So in the last class, we started to talk about the customer journey. We started to talk about personas and how a business analyst or a user experience designer would use personas. And we described different attributes, different components of a persona. And I explained that a business analyst will use persona to imagine the requirements that different stakeholders would have, different user groups would have. So you're trying to develop a software for people you can't see. Personas help you create a version of the person, of someone, of a user of your system, right? So your persona will help you create a version of someone who would use your system. And because of that imagination you have about who the person is and what they would need and what they want to do with your system, you can tease out requirements. You can envision things they would need or features they would want to use on your system. Or for a US expert, how they will want to use your system. So the kinds of activities they will want to perform with your system and how those activities would flow. And we saw different examples of personas yesterday. One persona we saw was this Rachel, who is a reliability researcher, and we saw the different components of our persona. That you can have a bio of the person, which makes the person even more realistic. And imagine you are in front of your stakeholders trying to convince them of why you need certain features or why certain features should be considered in your system. You can give a background of why a particular user may need a certain feature. Okay, this user is a mother with 3 children. She's very busy. She goes to work all day, comes back in the evening and wants to use this feature. Okay, so why do we need keyless entry in cars, for example? Why do we need say a key fob that you put in your pocket, or once your phone senses that it's close to your car can open? Okay, so the developers would have definitely created personas. They will say, oh, that imagine a mother coming out from a shopping mall with several bags of goods and things she has bought, right? And her baby screaming close to her and next to her and all that. And she wants to get into the car. Imagine this mom has walked all day with all those bags that she's carrying. Does she need to bring out key again and be trying to open her door? Why can't you have a car that detects that she's close to it and opens for her? Why can't you have the car even open the door for her or open the boot for her if she gets close to the boot? And those are how people create systems where they are teasing out potential requirements or requirements users would have by creating personas of those users. Right? So imagining different types of users, giving them background stories, and imagining how they would use your system because of the background stories you have given them. So those are personas. Personas, again, are used by business analysts as well as user experience experts. Anyone can use a persona, but business analysts mainly use them to tease out requirements or to explain or defend a requirement that they think would be meaningful. So it's used in eliciting requirements. But for the user experience expert, is used to show how a particular user will flow through the system. So we've talked about a couple of Scrum artifacts. We talked about the product backlog as we described the product owner's role in refining the backlog items, so the requirements in the backlog. I explained the sprint backlog and how that contains the amount of work that developers want to do in a sprint, amount of work taken from the product backlog that developers want to act upon, want to execute or implement in a sprint to create an increment. Then we talked about the definition of done, and I said this is a checklist of what it will take for that increment to be considered complete. Right? And this is usually something that will be dictated by the product owner. Product owner will say what he wants to see to determine that an increment is complete. Now, we're getting into more agile terminologies and more agile artifact. And one artifact that we'll come to see, especially when we get into Jira or when we demonstrate Jira, is the epic. We know by now the concept of user story, which is a definition of a detailed but succinct, short description of the functional requirement of a system. Related user stories are usually put in an epic, are grouped together in what is called an epic. So it's just a group of user stories. So an epic is just essentially a group of user stories that are related maybe to a feature or to an increment or to a minimum viable product. Another artifact we'll see and discuss some more later is the burn down chart. The burn down chart is something used by Scrum Masters and presented mainly to product owners for decision making. So you have your sprint, which is the fixed time box, fixed period, usually 2 weeks, in which developers must carry out work. A software project, a software product may take several sprints. Let's assume that the product is going to take 1 year to develop, and we have broken this 1 year down into sprints. As we are carrying out sprints, the amount of work required to finish the product is reducing. So imagine a burn down chart to be something that describes the amount of work initially required to finish a product, an IT product. And that chart ideally will be going down as sprints go on, because for every sprint we are doing some part of the work. So the chart will be going down. So it's burning down. That is the size. If it's starting from, let's say you have a chart like this, where this is the amount of work we need to get started. As we, you have sprints here, sprint 1, sprint 2, sprint 3, sprint 4. As the sprints go on, the chart is supposed to be coming down because the amount of work will be reducing. So here you have amount work, and here you have the sprint. So as we're carrying out more sprints, the amount of work is supposed to reduce. And that's the concept of a burn down chart. A burn down chart is just a chart showing how the amount of work is reducing as sprint progresses, as iterations increase. Another way to look at a burn down chart is to imagine that the amount of work you want to do to implement a product or to create a product that you are the product owner on, or you are part of the development team on. Imagine that that amount of work is like a house, like very tall building. And as you do work, your goal is to burn down the work. So as you do work, you are reducing the building. So the more sprints, in sprint 1, you burn this one off. In sprint 2, you burn this amount of building, and you continue to burn down the house until the house is no more, meaning there's no more work left. That's the concept of a burn down chart. So it's just a chart, a real chart, a graph showing the amount of work left as sprints increase. So it starts from the maximum amount of work you need to do and for the whole product, and it reduces as you carry out sprints. The opposite of a burn down chart is the burn up chart. I don't know if many people use that, but it's essentially the same thing, but flipped. So it's just the burn down chart flipped. The burn up chart will be looking at the amount of work you have done. Right? So instead of trying to, so in this case, it's looking at the amount of work you have done per sprint. And it will be increasing because, so it's looking at the amount of increment or product you have created, right, with each sprint. So in this case, it's looking at how much you have developed rather than how much work has been done. Like the burn down chart is looking at how much work you have finished doing, right? This one is looking at, burn up chart is looking at how much you have developed. They convey essentially the same message. How much work you have put in or how much work you have completed gives us an idea of how much is left. Right? What is left? So the burn down chart, for example, if your burn down chart is here, what you are telling us is there's still some work left. Right? So the amount of work started from here and you have brought it down to this point. It means there's still work left. If you are focused on how much you have produced in terms of increment, and you are here in this middle, you are still telling us that there's still work to be done. There's still work we need to do. So these burn down charts or creating reports like this for burn down chart, burn up charts are tasks for the Scrum Master. They are not things a product owner will do or a BA will do. These are reports that Scrum Masters create to help us know how work is progressing so that we can estimate, if possibly, how many sprints left for us to get to our end goal. Okay. We can estimate how quickly we are moving, which is velocity. That's the next artifact I'll be talking about. So your sprint velocity is the average amount of hours is taken for the development team to complete the task in a sprint. The average amount of hours, the average amount of time taken to complete the development tasks in a sprint. Usually, your sprint velocity will be average among many sprints. So if your team has done like 2 sprints, we'll look at the average amount of time it took them to complete the task in sprint A. So maybe it took them, if we're using hours now, so maybe it took them 40 hours to complete the task they were assigned in sprint A, and it took them another 38 hours to complete the task in sprint B. Then their velocity in hours will be an average of this 40 plus 38 divided by 2. This is 20 plus 19, which is 39. So their sprint velocity in hours will be 39 hours. Now, some development teams don't calculate the amount of time taken to complete tasks in hours. Some use what is called story points. story points. Now, story points will mean different things to different teams, or how story points are computed will mean different things to different teams. And we'll talk about story points in greater detail when we move into demonstrating Jira. But story points are just a way to compare the complexity of one task to another, or one user story to another. Remember that the product backlog contains user stories, and we need to estimate how much of these stories we can do in a sprint. As our sprint is 2 weeks. So how many of these requirements can we do in a sprint? That's the question that we answer during sprint planning. How many of the story items in the product backlog can we do in a sprint? So developers, product owner, scrum master, everybody will meet. We'll be looking at each story, each requirement in this product backlog. And we'll say requirement A. Of course, the requirements are already prioritized by the product owner in order of importance. So take requirement A, and then you ask the developers, what's the story point if you are using story points, or number of hours if you are using number of hours that it will take to do this task. Number of hours, story point. Story point is just many times a random number. Some people use what is called the Fibonacci numbers. Those of us who did computer science will remember this. And then those of us who have done anything regarding Scrum may remember this. So some people use what is called the Fibonacci numbers. Fibonacci numbers are just a series of numbers and so on. They are not odd numbers like this, right? And you can see all these are not odd numbers. There's a pattern to it, right? There's a pattern to it, and there are different types of Fibonacci series. So some people use Fibonacci numbers. And the idea behind Fibonacci numbers is because, or the idea behind using Fibonacci rather than just regular numbers is because there's some degree of randomness to Fibonacci numbers. So here we have 1, 2, 3. The next number is not 4, it jumps to 5. The next one may be some other number, right, that may not follow a sequence you would expect, but it still follows a pattern. But it's not just the pattern a normal person would expect. And so why are we using all these numbers? What we want to be able to do is compare one story, one user story to another. So story A versus story B in terms of their complexity, to say which one is more complex. So if a Scrum team is using story points, they may say, okay, this user story or this requirement, let's assign 5 story points to it. That 5 story points will have a meaning to the team. That 5 story points may mean 5 hours, right? It may mean maybe 15 hours. So they will have an internal meaning to that team. So you have to figure out what story points mean to your team. It may mean developer capacity, right? And we'll get into all this. So another story may be 7 story points. So essentially what you are saying is that story B is more complex than story A. And so story B will require more time. Some people just use time straight. Okay, this will take us 3 days. This will take us 5 days, which means story B is more complex than story A. And that's what we want to do. We want to be able to compare the stories. And so we look at, if at the end of the day, if you use story points, if you use days, right? So story point, maybe Fibonacci numbers, or you use days, and some people use t-shirt sizes, like small, medium, large, extra large, maybe extra, extra large. So you assign t-shirt sizes to the stories in the product backlog. You may look at the developers may look at one story and say, okay, this one is small, meaning it's something that will take them. So they will have the meaning of small for that organization or for that team. So small may mean 2 days or 1 day or 5 hours. Medium may mean a whole day. Large may mean 2 days, right? So they will have what that means to them. So they assign these different values to stories in order to know which is more complex than another. Now, the story points will help you calculate the velocity. So if your team is using Fibonacci sequence as your story point, then your average velocity will be measured in terms of that story point. If your team is using, if they are not using story points at all and they are using just hours, right, then your average velocity will be measured in hours. If it's days, then it will be measured in the number of days. If it's t-shirt sizes, then you measure in the average of t-shirt sizes where possible. So that's the meaning of velocity, the average amount of time it takes your team to finish the task in a sprint. Okay. So we already know what increments mean. We know what tasks mean. And I mentioned that your stories, which are your requirements, written in form of user stories, right? So the stories in your product backlog will be changed into tasks by developers. Stories in product backlog will be converted into tasks by developers. Guys, when you move the stories into the sprint backlog, for developers to do it, they'll pick each story and convert them to tasks, to actual tasks that they can perform. Because your stories is telling them what you want to do or what feature you want to see or how you want a feature to work. They will now convert that into tasks for themselves that they will perform. Everything you produce in the sprint is an increment. What the product owner provides is the user story and the acceptance criteria. Is there any of these artifacts that you don't understand? Although we'll still touch on some of them again later, we're going deeper into user stories next. Once we round off the general Scrum ceremonies and discussing this artifact, we'll get deeper into user stories. Or is there any of these artifacts that you don't understand? I guess that's a no. Okay, so
I
let's
joined. Sorry,
yeah,
I
go
joined a
on.
little bit late, so I'm gonna read over the ones that I missed before I joined in. So just the first few ones you touched on, um, they're not very clear, but I will study it to catch up.
Which few ones are you talking about?
I think I joined in when you started talking about I think it was the velocity. That was when I joined in.
Okay.
So yeah, I think you've already spoken about the product backlog, the sprint definitions, epic, and all that. But I will read over that maybe after class today, or do we watch the video?
Okay. So the thing is, we've talked about product backlog in previous classes extensively. So if you have any question about product backlog, you can ask, because we've talked about it before. I did not talk about it in any length today. And we've talked about sprint backlog. We've talked about definition of done. The only things I talked about that you may have missed would be epic. Okay, moving on. So let's recap. In Scrum, every day, the Scrum team is supposed to have what is called a Scrum meeting. The people that must be in this meeting are the developers and the Scrum master. It is encouraged that the product owner be in the meeting, but it's not a must, because the product owner is a very special person that may have other things to do. The people that must be in the meeting are the developers and the Scrum Master who is leading the meeting. The daily meeting is supposed to help us get a sense of progress towards our goal. And our goal is to deliver an increment at the end of the sprint. So the daily meeting is to check up on the developers and make sure everything is going on well. What benefit do you see to daily meetings? Anyone? So the key questions you ask in a daily meeting are, what did you do yesterday? What do you plan to do today? And do you have any blockers? What benefits do you see to asking these questions? Anyone, please unmute and answer. What benefit do you see to asking these questions every day from your developers? And if you don't see any benefit, please feel free to say so.
So the daily scrum, like you just mentioned, the developer would they're going to answer 3 questions. What you did yesterday. So it's just like, and what you did today and what you're going to do tomorrow. If there's any blockage or if there's any obstacle. So one is just to make everybody know what they are doing. So it shows the pillars of Scrum, which is transparency, and also the job that is being done in the sprint can be inspected by everybody. And if there is any obstacle, you can get help from even the developer. If there are senior developer there that have done something similar, you could also get help. So it's a way of of self-assessment. The team is self-assessing themselves and also assessing whether they're going to achieve the sprint goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew. So yes, there are several reasons why you may want to ensure you are following up with the team. One is to make them accountable. So yes, self-assessment. When you come out in the public in front of your teammates to say, this is what you are going to do today, you are essentially making yourself responsible and accountable for something, right? So if you don't do it, tomorrow we can ask you questions. And number 2, it makes sure everyone's hand is on deck. We all know how much progress we are making towards the increment. We know where we all are. We know what is going on with everyone. And if there's any blocker, it's open to everyone. We can see it. So if there are some members of the team that are not working together as they should be, maybe there is break in communication, we can all see it, because the developer will mention, oh, I'm not able to make progress because of this blocker, because I'm not able to reach this person to get so and so information. And the Scrum Master can arrange to resolve that before that tanks the project, before that kills their project, right? So that's some of the reason why these daily scrums are beneficial. Again, I want to mention, it's not very important, but organizations may not necessarily do scrum meetings daily. This is a recommendation, is a prescription, not a must. So who can remind us of what a sprint planning meeting is, what it entails? So please unmute and talk. Someone other than Mr. Andrew, who can remind us of what a sprint planning meeting is.
Okay, I'll just as some like I'll just explain what I could remember of it. Like it's a meeting held in a team, like the normal team and organization have to review the progress of what they've set aside to do, like the goal, the plan. They would also look at what they've done so far and see how they're going to achieve what they are set to achieve in future, like in few days time or few months time, what they set to achieve, something like that. During the meeting, they would sit to discuss, as a group, to analyze where some people are doing well. They would discuss that where some people are lacking, like maybe if there's weaknesses in what they are trying to achieve, and if they have to collaborate to take the weakness out of it, and just for them to set people on record to achieve the goals. I think that's majorly what it's all about.
Let me just add to what Winifred just said. Yeah. So the sprint planning is done at the beginning of the sprint. So the sprint planning is a way of planning in Agile. You know, in the traditional, we would plan before we start the project, but in Agile, you plan within a sprint what we're going to do. So we look at the product backlog. From that product backlog, we are going to plan the sprint backlog. And we're going to plan the manpower. We're going to look at what we're going to, that is when we look at what we're going to achieve within that 2 weeks of sprint. It depends on the company or it depends on the team. So it's usually like a 2 to 4 hours meeting. And we do estimation during that period, estimation of manpower, estimation of story point. And the product owner should be, it's a very critical meeting. So the product owner will be there, and the Scrum Master, the development team, because that is when we're going to plan the estimation of the story point. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for those responses. I think, like has been said, sprint planning is a meeting that occurs, or a ceremony that occurs at the beginning of the sprint. And the goal is to identify the amount of work that can be done in that sprint. The amount of work that can be done in that sprint. So it will happen on the first day of the sprint. The team members, the members of the Scrum team meet and they look at the items, the prioritized items in the product backlog, and they figure out which ones they can do in that sprint. Okay. Who can tell me what is done in a sprint review meeting?
I'll try.
Okay.
So in the sprint review meeting, I think this is the stage where each of them comes together to like give an update of the product they are doing or they are working on. So that's when they will determine like which of the products is done, which is not done, which part of the project needs more work or which is not. So it's like the in that meeting, that's when they review, the completion of the product, which part of the product is ready and which is not. That's what I understand.
Okay. So in your sprint review, the developers present what they have done to the product owner for his approval. Sprint review is supposed to happen at the end, towards the end of the sprint, either the second to the last day or the last day of a sprint. The expectation is that the developer should have finished all the tasks assigned to them. They are supposed to present the increment to the product owner, who would approve or disapprove. So all sprint activities that relate to developing the increment should have been concluded. Sprint review is a word that means you are looking back to analyze what has been done in the past. It means the project should be done, past tense, completed. That is that part of the project, that chunk, like that portion of the product should be completed. And so you are presenting what has been completed to the product owner, who would say whether it's good enough or is not good enough. Okay. So a sprint review is like your final defense. You're going to present your project to your professors or lecturers so that they see what you have done. That is not the place where you'll be making corrections or adding more things. You're supposed to present what you have done to the product owner. So that's your sprint review meeting. Who can tell me what a sprint retrospective meeting entails? Is Laura with us? Is Laura with us?
Let me try with this one. Okay. Let me try with this one. Okay.
Laura, what is sprint retrospective?
What's the question? Laura, what is sprint retrospective? I don't have an idea.
Okay.
Let me try this. I think I didn't answer the other one well, so let's see this if it's a sprint retrospective meeting is usually held after each spring cycle.
Mhm.
They, as in, the main reason why they hold this retrospective meeting is to reflect on the previous sprint, and also to identify ways that they are going to improve on their next sprint. Something like that. Then I think it's usually led by the Scrum Master is also involved in the meeting, and they encourage team members to share their thoughts and their feedbacks.
Okay. For all these ceremonies, the Scrum Master is the facilitator. So the Scrum Master is always involved. The Scrum Master is the facilitator of all these Scrum ceremonies. So we have 4 of them here. Like Winifred said, the sprint retrospective happens on the last day of the sprint before another sprint starts. So on the last day of the sprint, the idea is to look back on the sprint. The developers will look back on the events in the sprint and see what worked well, what did not work well, what they want to do more of, and what they want to stop doing or do less of. So everybody shares their feelings and thoughts and ideas and suggestions for how to correct whatever problems they have. And the Scrum Master is supposed to take note of all these issues and all the solutions proposed and make sure at least one of them is implemented in the next sprint. So out of all these meetings or all these Scrum ceremonies, which one happens first?
The sprint planning meeting.
Wale, what do you think?
Though the sprint planning meeting and the daily scrum can happen on the same day.
Is Wale there?
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I went to the bathroom. What did you say?
Said out of all these ceremonies, which one happens first?
Which one happens first?
Yes.
I'll say daily scrum meeting. Because that's when you talk about the project that you're doing. Actually, sprint planning. Yeah, I would say the daily scrum meeting because that's when you talk about the projects, that you're doing, what levels, like how everyone is, what progress and everyone is making in the project.
I think it's the sprint planning meeting is the first, because you said, from what you've been telling us, there's head at the beginning of each sprint cycle, so that should be the first. Then the daily scrum meeting, it's something that happens daily, but first I think the planning is the first. It's held at the beginning of each sprint cycle.
There's a sprint planning meeting.
Okay. The sprint planning meeting is the first meeting in your sprint. It is the meeting that helps us decide the work we want to do in that sprint. You can't have a daily Scrum meeting where you are talking about progress of work if you have not even decided on the work you want to do in that sprint. Is that clear? I hope we all understand that. So the sprint planning meeting is the very first meeting you do. The last meeting in a sprint is the retrospective. You do your retrospective after everything that has to do with the increment is done, whether you were able to successfully do the increment or not. As long as that sprint has ended, the retrospective is what ends the sprint. In between sprint planning and retrospective is where you have your daily Scrum meetings and your sprint review meeting towards the end. The sprint review meeting is where you present the increment, what you have been able to achieve that sprint, where you present it to the product owner. So the first meeting is always your sprint planning meeting. Now, if your sprint planning meeting has been done well, which would take 2 to 4 hours, I don't see how. I'm not saying it's not possible. There may be some weird, there are different types of organizations. There may be some weird organizations out there, but I don't see how you do a daily Scrum on the same day, right? Because you have just spent 4 hours planning the thing. You have to have done something for us to say, what did you do yesterday? What do you want to do tomorrow? So after the sprint planning meeting, immediately you are breaking down tasks. The developers are breaking down tasks and assigning it to themselves. So you wait till the next day to ask them, so what did you do yesterday? Right. Now, it doesn't mean that some organizations, people can do whatever they want, but that won't be following the normal process. That's what I'm trying to point out. Now, there's another meeting called the pre-planning meeting. Pre-planning meeting is usually conducted by what we call the three amigos. The three amigos. Three amigos. Amigo is Spanish for friends. So the pre-planning meeting can take place maybe on the second week of the sprint. Usually it doesn't involve the developers, the responsible developers. So it's not stressing them. It will involve the business analyst, the product owner, if they are not the same person, right? So the business analyst, your product owner, and the Scrum Master. In some cases, it will involve maybe the manager of the development team. And what happens in that meeting is sort of an alignment meeting where they all meet together to, I don't want to use the word groom, to refine the backlog, to look at what items should be prioritized, what items are no longer needed in the product backlog, right? So they use that as an opportunity to look at what's up with our product backlog and even start prioritizing for the next sprint. So that in the sprint planning meeting for the next sprint on that Monday, so if you have 2 weeks, right, for your sprint, let's say your sprint starts on a Monday and the sprint is supposed to go 1 week, that is next Monday, then 2 weeks. Your retrospective will happen here. Let's say your sprint review happens this day. Every day sprint planning with developers. Usually at the end of or at the beginning of week 2, which is here, there will be that three amigo meeting, which is essentially a pre-planning meeting. And in this meeting, you have just the Scrum Master, the product owner, and the business analyst or the lead of the development team. If there's no business analyst that is speaking for the developers, then you have the lead of the development team. Okay, and they meet to prioritize the items in the product backlog, to look at the items in the product backlog. The development manager can give advice on whatever is not clear. They can ask questions, so that it's not on sprint planning day, which is the next day after the end of these 2 weeks, maybe the next Monday, if it's Monday to Monday. So let's say this one is ending on Friday. So that Monday, that's not when the development manager will be seeing the product backlog items for the first time. Or that's not when the product owner will start prioritizing. So we'll have prioritized, we'll have refined his backlog while the developers are working, so that the things they need for the next sprint are ready. So the next Monday, work can start. That's after, if it's 2 weeks, right? After the 2 weeks, the Monday after their sprint, work can start. They can plan again for that sprint. They can pick out items that have been prioritized, put in their sprint backlog, and work continues. Any question?
No, Prof. But from what you mentioned, the sprint prioritization is not a ceremony. Is that correct?
No, it's not.
Okay.
It's not considered a formal ceremony per se, right? So nobody's talking about the amount of time you need or any recommendation. It's just a place where these 3 key people can meet to look at the items on the list. It's something the product owner can as well do themselves. And in some organization, the product owner will make those decisions on their own, right? But it makes sense to bring these people in, the development lead or the BA that is speaking for the developers, so they can give input. They can see what's going on and know how everything is moving. Okay. Any question?
No.
So let's recap. All the requirements needed to create a product will be in the product backlog. Every requirement. So imagine you want to make a car. All the parts of the car, the specification of the different parts, the tires, the wheels, the seats in the car, the seat belt, everything will be listed here in the product backlog. Meaning if we do all the things in the product backlog, we'll get a full car. But we're in Agile, we can't do everything. That will be waterfall. If we say we want to wait till you finish completing everything and you are the, it's a small team building the car, that means we won't be able to enjoy movement or traveling until the whole car is complete. So let's say we decide that let's use some of these resources to build a tricycle, or a motorbike. So use some part of the engine, use half of the rubber, the raw materials we have for tire, use some of them to make a motorbike. And we say that motorbike is something we can do in a sprint, 2 weeks. So the task we select from all the tasks we could possibly do, and we put in a new backlog, is what will lead to the motorbike. That new backlog is what is called your sprint backlog. So for your sprint backlog, you are selecting a portion of the entire tasks you have, or the entire stories, all your requirements. You're selecting a portion of it and you are putting it or making it available to your developers for them to do within a time period. So this sprint is just a time period, or some people will say a time box. So what you are saying is, we don't know how long this whole product backlog will take to complete, but we can do this portion within this time period. And so the portion we can complete within a time period, that's the portion we'll make available to developers. The developers are the ones that will tell us that they can complete this portion within a time period. So those requirements we select go into the sprint backlog as the box of time. So requirements that we now have a time period for. It's what is called the sprint backlog. Now, from the sprint backlog, you expect your developers to start implementing these requirements one at a time. And daily, we'll be checking up on them to see how they are doing. Daily. And at the end of the sprint, we expect them to produce a product increment. That is the story of your sprint in Scrum. Now let's talk about some other Scrum artifacts, especially what will be in this sprint backlog or your product backlog. I've mentioned that in the product backlog, you'd have user stories. A user story is an informal, general explanation of a software feature written from the perspective of the end user. Its purpose is to articulate how a software feature will provide value to the customer. A user story is a short description of a functional requirement written from the perspective of the user. Written from the perspective of the user. Now, and let me put a caveat here. Let me put a clause that moves away from this typical definition. There are user stories that we call technical user stories. I will talk about that later. These user stories are written from the perspective of the developer, not the user. So essentially, it's the same thing. So don't think anything is going to complicate issues for you. It's the same thing. It's just that where we're saying as a user, I want to do this, we'll be saying as a developer, I want to develop this feature so that the user can do that, right? And then we describe the acceptance criteria from the developer's perspective, but we'll talk about that. So what's important for you to know is a user story is a representation of your requirement, your functional requirement. I showed you earlier on in the course that your user story has 3 key components to it. Your user story will tell us who wants to do what and why. So it's telling us the stakeholder and the functional requirement they have and the business need that functional requirement will fulfill. So in your user story, It is encouraged that you write a title to your user story. If it's possible, you put a scenario, and I'll talk about that in some length later. A scenario for your user story, meaning what is the focus of this user story? In what instance will this user story hold? And we'll see all that before you go into the main user story. So your user story is your requirement, but defined specifically using a format that help us know who wants to do what and why. So we saw this example of a user story. In this case, a user wants to post their resume on a job portal. The user is a job seeker. And the reason why they want to do that is so that employers can find them. So the story will go as follows. As a job seeker, I want to post my resume on the job portal so employers can find me. Who wants to do what and why? So what this story does is tell developers who wants to do what and what they should develop. So they need to create a capability or a feature that allows job seekers to post resumes on a job portal, on the job portal they are working on. So if that feature was lacking, now the developers know that they have to create it. So this is what they have to create. This is the requirement. A feature to allow people post resumes on the job portal system. So a user story is a way to communicate requirements so developers can see the value of the requirement and also see who is asking for it. Rather than just saying, Mr. Developer or Miss Developer, create a button to allow people to upload resume. Now you are telling them a story behind that feature. This type of user needs this feature, and this is the business value that feature would bring to that user. This is the benefit that feature will bring to the stakeholder in question. So this is the structure of your user stories. As a blah, 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 I want to do blah, 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 so that this can happen. So the keywords there is as a, I want to, so that, or so. Let's see examples. Now, rather than having or writing 300 user stories, some people put their user stories in a tabular format like this. Since the keywords are as a, I want to, so that, right? You can just put everything in a table like this. As a, supposed to be an if we're being grammatical, but as a administrator, I want to see a list of all members and visitors so that I can monitor site visits. As a administrator, I want to add new categories so that I can allow members to create engaging content. Right? So using these keywords as column names, you can group plenty user stories in this very small table. So create a structure and put all of them. Now, this is not necessarily something you would have to do or want to do. You may not even like the idea, But this is just a way to put your plenty, instead of repeating these words every time, you can just put all these user stories together, right, in a tabular format or in a matrix. And you have the advantage of being able to prioritize them, identifying what sprint backlog or what sprint they are in, and keep record of their status. So you could use this as a traceability matrix, as a way to trace the progress or monitor the progress of your requirement. You could also have this as a way to prioritize your requirement. Now, this is, by the way, this is just to show you that these keywords can be used to group your requirements. The key thing is to know how to write the requirements in Agile in the first instance. And requirements in Agile are called user stories. Requirements in Agile are called user stories because you are converting your raw requirement to this user story. So we don't necessarily want to see your raw requirement. Right? Your action in Agile is to convert those requirements to user stories and acceptance criteria. I mentioned to you that user stories tell half of the story because they represent functional requirements. So this is functional requirement. The other half of our solution requirement is the non-functional requirement. Your acceptance criteria carries the non-functional requirement, contains the non-functional requirement. So one important thing you have to know is that your user story should follow the invest principle. And we talked about this when we were talking about requirements. We said requirements in Agile. And so a requirement in Agile is a user story. Requirements in Agile follow the invest principle. They should be independent. They should be negotiable. They should be valuable, estimable, small, and testable. So we talked about this before. I won't go into that anymore. But your user stories should address one thing. So you should not have user story about the person should be wearing a cap and the person should be wearing a shirt and whatever, right? So you can't have multiple functional requirements in the same user story. You should address one singular functional requirement. So still on user stories. These are the key words again. As a role, I want, so you're stating the goal, which is the functional requirement, so that describing the benefit. And after your user story, you are supposed to state the acceptance criteria. If you write a user story without an acceptance criteria, that is a crime that you should be arrested for and locked up in a requirements jail. Because what you would have done is you have written a story that we can never know when the requirement has been met. When there's no rule, anything goes. So your acceptance criteria tell us the conditions under which we would accept the user story as complete and well done. So this is another example of a user story. As an account manager, I want a sales report of my account to be sent to my inbox daily so that I can monitor the sales progress of my customer portfolio. As an account manager, I want a sales report to be sent to my inbox daily so that I can monitor the sales progress of my customer portfolio. So just take a deep breath. Look at user story as you are telling a story of why the stakeholder would want a particular requirement. So you have to state who the stakeholder is, what requirements they want, and why. Then the next part is to state the acceptance criteria. Under what condition will this stakeholder accept this requirement as done? In this example, the stakeholder will accept the requirement as done if the report is sent daily to their inbox, if the report contains the following sales details, which will be listed, then if the report is in CSV format. So your acceptance criteria will go with the user story. So let's talk more about acceptance criteria. Acceptance criteria are the conditions of a project, product, or aspects within them. Right? So your increment, right, would have plenty user stories. So each of those user stories. So the conditions that must be met before a deliverable is accepted. So the product owner is supposed to state the acceptance criteria for each user story before the work starts, so developers can know what they are targeting. You can't give someone a task, hey, please go and help me get coffee, and you don't tell them what conditions or what criteria it will take for you to accept the coffee. Do you want sugar with your coffee? Do you want it to be black or with cream or with milk? How much sugar do you want? You have to state all those things. If not, if the person goes to get you any type of coffee, they are right and you are wrong. So acceptance criteria are crucial. So acceptance criteria defines the boundaries of a user story that are used to confirm when the story is completed and working as intended. So you are supposed to state requirements that must be met for that functional requirement to be accepted. Now, here it says acceptance criteria are sometimes called definition of done. But that's not entirely true. So your acceptance criteria should be part of your definition of done. Sometimes it may be good enough that your acceptance criteria defines what is done, right? Since let's say in an increment, you have 3 stories and all you want is for your developers to implement those stories, right? No extra, nothing extra, just implement those stories. And once they implement those stories, the project is done or the increment is done. Then the acceptance criteria for those stories are good enough to be your definition of done. But sometimes there are more things involved outside the story. And those things will go into your definition of done. It may be, okay, after you have created all these things or executed or implemented all the user stories, right? And you have done them well. So we have accepted each of them. You still need to organize them in a certain way, right? And so you are talking about organizing everything, all the different features or all the different tools or all the different parts you have created. And in that space, that rule of how to organize them will not go into any single acceptance criteria. So that is more like an acceptance criteria for the entire increment. Acceptance criteria refer to a set of predefined requirements. Look at this example. as a job seeker, I want to post my resume in a job portal so employees can find me. The acceptance criteria should answer certain questions. For example, what information should be collected from the user to allow the user post their resume? The user says they want to post resume on a job portal. So the developer has to create a way for them to post this resume. What will the developer create? So the acceptance criteria should tell the developer the information that must be collected from the user for them to post their resume. The acceptance criteria should tell the developer where they will store the information. So the user wants to post resume. The developer has to create a way for them to be able to post this resume on the portal. So that means the resume is leaving the user and is going to the system that the developer is building. What information from the resume do we need to go into the system? Can the user just post anything they like, or are there certain information we will need? Where will this resume information be stored on the system? Will the user need to pay? Right. So whatever will be required for that story to be considered done and okay is what forms your acceptance criteria. Acceptance criteria will depend on the stakeholder and what they want. Now, let's get into, before we go into this, let me give you one exercise to do. So I know we did a task, an assignment that involved shopping on Amazon. So let's write user stories for shopping on Amazon. Okay. So let's assume that a customer of Amazon wants to be able to view the status of their order so they can track the progress of their order. Can you come up with a user story for that? So a customer, an Amazon customer now, they want to be able to view the status of their order. So they have ordered something, they want to know what is happening with the order so they can track the progress.
Proof. I think you've just you've just uh, you've just said the user story. Just for us to just put as a customer, I want to be able to view the product I've bought so that I can quickly track it. Is it not something like that?
Okay, I want to hear other people's view.
Because you brought the two actions. I mean, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I want to hear other people's view. So like I said, a customer on Amazon wants to view their order status because they want to track the progress of their order. So come up with a user story for that. Wale, Winifred, Tosin, if you can talk now, and Laura. Have you ever bought anything on Amazon and have you gone to track it? So write a story for what a user will want to, right? Why would a user want to track? Why would they need that function?
Would you say a customer wants to be able to um, track the item purchased to find out the status
So
of
yes, let me rephrase. A customer wants to be able to view the status of their order, so they can track the progress of the order.
It's just we're gonna do it like this one here, like the user story, right? I think just like what Mr. Andrew said, you said it all. Like the customer wants to be able to view the status of their order so that they can track its progress and know when to expect delivery. Oh, that will answer the last question. I don't know if it's okay.
Yeah, but
Okay,
you have
Prof,
not said the story.
I think let me put it this way: as a customer shopping on Amazon, or as a customer, I want to be able to view my order status and track my package in real time.
So I've put the
Sorry, my son.
yeah, that's fine. I put the gist of the story, partially written, and the question in chat.
Gist of the story.
Let me try.
The question in chat.
Let me try. As a customer, that's the who. I want to view the status of my order on Amazon. That's the what, so that I can track the order. That's the why.
Okay.
Or you're looking for something like this,
Okay.
which is what Laura just mentioned.
You're looking for something like this, which is what Laura just mentioned.
I want to be able to view the status of my package, so that I can plan delivery, or so that I can track the package.
Okay.
Anyone.
So Laura was correct. Mr. Andrew is correct. You get the gist. You follow the format. As a customer, or in this case, if I'm using user, then I can say as a user, I want to be able to view my order status so I can track the progress of my order. Now, the way I prefer to write it, I'll just say I want to, rather than say I want to be able to. Okay. So rather than say I want to be able to do something, I'll just say I want to.
Okay.
So many people write I want to be able to, right? But it's just, to me, unnecessary. So I just write, and I'll put this in the chat. I want to view, let me finish typing this. Okay. So as a user, I want to view my order status so I can track the progress of my order. That's it. Now let's come up with acceptance criteria for this. What are the conditions in which we will accept this user story as done? Don't be quiet, unmute and talk. So imagine you are the user and you want to view your order status so you can track your progress, the progress of your order. You are telling the developer what you want and why. So what are the conditions in which you would accept this particular feature as done? What are the requirements? What do you expect to see? What do you expect the person to do? That's your acceptance criteria.
Let me try. So as a customer, I want to be able to view my order status and be able to track the progress of the order.
Okay. But you haven't said the acceptance criteria. You repeated part of the user story and added and. We're saying, what should the developer do, or what should the customer expect to see? Right? What should the customer expect?
They should expect to be able to view their status or the order status and track their order.
So when the customer views their order status, what should they see in the order status?
They should see the status of the order.
Okay. Tosin, you wrote notification via email or SMS with tracking information. Well, so that is not actually the case, because the story is talking about viewing order status. Right? So the assumption here is that the customer or the user wants to go somewhere on the platform, so there should be an address where they can see their status of order. If we wanted notification via email or something, then we'll say, as a user, I want to receive notifications via email so I can track. Right? So your requirements, it has to be clear. We should not be able to interpret it in multiple ways. This person is saying, I want to view my order status. Yeah, you could argue that we could make it better and say, I want to view my order status on Amazon.com, right? Which will make it better, which is true. It will make it clearer, more specific. And that's how I write my own requirements. I want them to be extremely specific so that you don't misinterpret them. Okay. Now, acceptance. Yes.
Okay, yeah, I just want to mention one of the acceptance criteria that will be correct. The customer should be able to log into Amazon website and navigate into the section where you have history.
Okay.
History section. Is that an exception? Is that correct?
Yes, it is. We'll talk about that more, but that's a precondition. Right? So that's something that must be in place for us to say, for us to even know whether this viewing order status is possible, right? So, well, when we get to, we're still going advanced in this user story. When we get to deeper into user story, we'll get into what is called behavioral driven development, Gherkin, and all those things. And you get a sense of where preconditions come in, like situations that must exist before we can even know whether the feature is working or not. Now, being able to log in to Amazon is a precondition. It's something that the user must be able to do before we can check whether they are able to check their order status or not. So if the developer develops something that the user can use to see the status of their order. Before we can test it, the user must be able to log in, right? Before the user can test it. So that's a precondition. Is not necessarily a core part of the acceptance criteria for this feature, or is part of the acceptance criteria in general. Right? The user must be able to log in. That must happen before we can even know whether this thing is working or not. Right? So someone mentioned that when the user logs in, the user should be able to see the list of their current orders, right? The user should be able to see the status of their order. I think that's Wally. And I said, so what should the status show?
The status should show something like pending, in progress, or delivered. Is that something?
Yeah, yes. You are telling a developer to develop something, right? You say you should develop something that will show a status. You have to tell the developer what will be inside that status. Right? Status is broad. You say, I want to view my order status so that I can track the progress of my order. So what information should the developer convey to the user that wants this functionality? You have to tell the developer. All those things go into your acceptance criteria. So like you rightly said, yes, it may be something like in progress or processing. Maybe that it has been shipped. It may be that the product has already been delivered. Right? So those are status. So you want one of the above should be shown to the user. Do you think there's any other acceptance criteria that will be necessary here? Any other acceptance criteria? So you want to see if what you have bought, if the good you have ordered is in progress, if it has been delivered, if it has been shipped. Is that all? Is that all the information you will need? What if it has been shipped? Laura, you want to say something?
I think we also need to be sure that everything is complete.
Laura, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think I may also want to see that everything I ordered was part of, is part of the delivery or something.
Yes.
And nothing is missing.
Okay.
Maybe a list of the items.
True. Yes, correct. You want to see the list of the current orders. True. What else? So, Mr. Andrew, you mentioned that you want to see the status of the order, whether it's processing, shipped, or delivered. What if it has been shipped? Will the user want any other information if it has been shipped?
Like tracking number?
They want a tracking number, yes, so they can track the package.
Estimated date.
Estimated delivery date, yes. Good. So you want to put all that in the acceptance criteria that, okay, developer, these are the things you need to show to the user, right? So you see that you are designing the application. And that's what people don't know about BAs. They think or the developers, the people that write the programming language are the ones that actually create or create applications. But no, BAs create the application. The developers just implement it. Developers have outsourced the thinking of how an application should be designed to BAs. They have given it to BAs. So BAs are the ones that will say, okay, this is what it should contain. This is what should be there. This is what should be there for this stakeholder to be happy. Yeah. So thinking through these things. Now you are embodying a customer. You're thinking, okay, if I'm a customer, these are the kinds of information I will need. Right. And if they tell me that this thing has been shipped, then I would need this type of information. So I'll just paste something I've written here for everyone to see. So this will be my acceptance criteria. So let's do another one. So let's come up with a user story for a user to be able to add products to their shopping cart so they can purchase them later. This should be easy now. A user story for a user to be able to add products to their shopping cart so they can purchase them later. So that's a user story for that use case. Anyone?
Thank you, Prof. Just as like the last one. So as a user or as a customer, I want to add product into my shopping cart so that I can purchase it later.
Okay.
Somebody has written one. See, as a user, I want to
Yeah, I can
be
see
able
what
to
Tosin
add.
wrote.
Okay,
Yes, so
Stosin.
yes, I think Tosin wrote, as a user, I want to add a product to my, I want to add products to my shopping cart for viewing later. You want to purchase them later.
Yeah. Okay.
So what will be the acceptance criteria for this user story? Like, how do you want the user to be able to do this? Anyone?
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Just like I'm going to follow the sample. So when I log into my account, I should be able to see my shopping cart, and in that shopping cart, I should be able to see the list of items that I have listed, or a list of items that I've selected, and also I should have option of removing them from the shopping cart or proceed to make payment.
Okay. Does anyone want to add anything to that? So when you go on Amazon now, how will the customer do this? Add products to their shopping cart so they can purchase item later, purchase them later. How will the customer do that?
So they will log into their account, and once they view, of course, they will browse through the product, and if they see the
So they will
product,
log into their account, and
I'm echoing. And once they see the product that they like, they will click add to cart, and the product goes to their cart.
Okay. And what happens after the product goes to cart? Remember, what you say is what the developer will do. That is what developer will create. Don't forget that. So you have said now the customer should be able to log into their account. And when they see a product they like, they should be able to click add to cart and the product goes to cart. What happens next?
And they should be prompted to go to their cart for final purchase.
Okay. Tosin has answered. The selected product should be saved in my cart and remain there every time I log into my account. I should be able to perform add, delete, update activities in my cart. Okay. So what are you updating? The items in the cart, Tosin? Okay. Yes, items. Okay. Anyone else has anything to add to this? I see Laura. I know you unmuted before. You are muted now, by the way. Okay, because of time, I'm just going to say yes, most of us got it right. We got most of the features or the requirements for the acceptance criteria right. We just forgot to mention one part. When you add products to your cart, shouldn't the price be updated? The cost of everything in your cart, shouldn't it be changing as you add and remove?
Yes.
So nobody talked about that. That means you are saying the developer should just develop something where you add items to the cart and it should not worry about the price changing. Then after it develops it, you now say, oh gosh, somebody has made a mistake somewhere, right? So you want to remember all these features. And usually you will get these requirements from your stakeholders, but in some cases you do your own research, right? You look at other products, especially if it's a feature that other people have implemented. You go and look at how they implemented it. And then you may see 3 different ways people implemented, then choose the one that is best for your organization. Okay, so let me give you an assignment. Tomorrow we'll get into more advanced user story, but I'll give you one user story to think about. It's still on the Amazon shopping thing we did. So I'll paste it in the um, chat. It's not an assignment that you are submitting or anything, but it's something when we come tomorrow, you would have to tell me the answer to. So I've posted it in the chat. So I want you to write a user story and an acceptance criteria for this. So you should use it to practice. I may forget to ask you, I may remember, I may call out specific names that you should tell me the answer. So everyone should try their hands on this. Now, if you're in an agile environment, your main work as a BA would most likely be writing user stories, a lot of them, right? Writing user stories. It's not difficult, but you need to warm your engines and do them now. It's not difficult, so do it now. Right? Write this user story and acceptance criteria. As you're writing user stories, you have to be thinking about what conditions would you accept this task or this functional requirement as good and done. What must happen? What would the user expect to see, or how will the thing behave? So tomorrow we'll go into a more advanced way to write user stories, or a different way to write user stories. Any question? So you can copy the text out and put it somewhere, save it somewhere, because when we close, when we end for today, you may not, it may disappear. Any question? So which would you prefer, writing user stories or doing different modeling techniques?
Prof, I think all of them is interesting. The most important thing, if you know them and develop them, all of them will be interesting.
That is the right answer. That's the correct answer. They are all interesting in their own right. And knowing all of them, you can mix and match. You can do different things. You have a lot of power. Okay, but in an agile environment, you mainly be writing user stories. So let's practice this. Okay. Any question before we go?